end up in the direction you're headed. It's pretty simple. So as you're on the path and things aren't turning out the way that you want them to, or you look around you and things aren't the way that you would like them to be, then it becomes quite obvious that there needs to be some form of change. And change can be anything, whatever, changing a culture, changing perspective, changing our attitudes about money, changing our attitudes on government, changing government, changing of government officials, and changing the culture of a community. And once a culture begins to be established, it becomes very, very difficult to change that culture. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit here. And I wrote a few things down to kind of keep me guided here on this journey here. But so how do we get there? Well, first of all, we must realize there is a need for change. That's the first step. Once you realize you've dug yourself into a hole, you got to stop digging and realize, okay, this isn't working. Something needs to change. So, but many times we want the benefits of change without the pain of making change. And that's one of the hardest parts. We can always choose how we respond to change, our experience, but we cannot choose the experience itself. So I'm going to say that again. We can choose how we respond to the change of our experience, how we choose to respond to it, but we cannot choose the experience itself. So where we are is where we are. What we have to deal with is what we have to deal with. Covering things up, ignoring things, hoping they go away, is never the best solution. So, one thing that makes change difficult is this: most people become comfortable with old problems rather than new solutions. So, if the pain is not great enough, a new solution to some people is even more scary than the pain of the problem that they're currently in. So I can handle the pain I'm in. I can handle what I'm used to. And so some people are satisfied with that rather than offering or looking at possible solutions, because those solutions would bring change. So many times we become perfectly prepared for a world that doesn't exist anymore. So in other words, we recognize the problems we have, but we continue to do the same things that got us into those problems in the first place, hoping this time it will bring some sort of solution. In other words, if we just keep hitting that nail hard enough, eventually it'll go in. But sometimes the nail bends, and then it causes much more problems, and the nail has to be taken out, and a whole new approach needs to be taken to the problem. So we also have to realize that cosmetic changes are not critical changes. In other words, you can put a fresh coat of paint on a weak wall, but that wall is still weak. It may look pretty, but it's still eventually going to fall. So we have to understand that cosmetic changes do not equate to critical changes. Critical changes equal real change. And it's a slow process. It's methodical. It has to be thought out. It has to be thought through. So again, it's a journey, and it's not easy. So how will change affect me? That's our first question we always ask. So typically I'm going to ask myself, what do I have to give up? Right? So you're offering change. You're talking about change. Well, what do I have to give up in order to bring about change? That's our first question. And it rightfully so, because change always brings some sort of disruption to the way we currently do things. So what's the pain going to be, right? So, but we have to understand this. What we accept and believe determines how we behave. And how we behave determines what is or what is not accomplished. So, what's your belief system? Are you willing to have your belief systems changed? So let's say you've trusted XYZ person for an extended period of time because that trust has always equated to some kind of benefit on your part, or you look around you and the trust in a particular individual seems to have brought things this far. But then there becomes patterns of disruption. You start finding things out about said individual or said community or whatever the case may be. And all of a sudden it begins to disrupt your pattern of thinking. It begins to disrupt everything you held true. So at first, when these occurrences take place, you don't believe them. So the first reaction is rejection. Well, I don't believe that. So you can be presented with facts, you can be presented with data, you can be presented with the truth as it is, and you say, well, I don't believe that. In other words, that weak wall looks so pretty, there is no way that the foundation is not there. No way. It looks too good. Why would they spend so much effort, so much money, and so much time making that wall look so pretty if it's just going to end up falling? That just doesn't make sense. So we refuse to believe what is because it brings about, again, a disruption to our belief system. However, when the wall begins to fall, we're faced with a critical moment. Okay, wow, the wall is falling. The paint didn't hold it up. So now what? Now I have to deal with the issue. More times than not, you have to tear the wall down because the damage is already done. Whereas if you would have believed the wall was weak in the first place and you would have begin to work on the foundation and begin to work to shore up those weak points, that wall could have lasted. But now the damage is irreversible. It's done. So now we have to reconstruct the wall. That's what change is sometimes. Change is the realization that my rejection of the need for change has now cost me to the point where I have to change. There is no other choice. So let's go back to this. Change is not an event. Change is a process. It's a journey. So we don't have one event and say, oh, wow, we've really changed. It's a journey. Creating a robust community will take positive events, no doubt about it. But it's each of those positive events building upon the other that begins to create the culture that we're looking for. So we must push back against carelessness and complacency. Carelessness and complacency will always lead to some type of destructive behavior, destructive event, destructive outcome. Carelessness and complacency. Okay? So you have to remain intentional. So I see the problem. There needs to be change. Now, what must I do to be a part of that change? And it has to be intentional. So, because again, remember, we can become so accustomed to the problems that we no longer see the problems. We begin to ignore problems, cover problems up. We don't want to address the problem because of all the issues that would cause. So sometimes we cross our fingers hoping that no one will recognize the problem until we're out of the position or out of the community, or we've moved on, and so the problem can't fall back on us. And there are people who are willing to pass the problem on as long as they don't have to deal with the problem. So let me give you an example. So many of you know I'm a Bible guy. So in the history of Israel, there was a king called Hezekiah. Hezekiah did great things to a certain point. Then he began to make bad decisions toward the end of his time. It actually ended up toward the end of his kingdom, toward the end of his reign, toward the end of his term, if you will. He began to make bad decisions. And the Lord came against him and basically let him know, that pronounced a judgment upon him and said, because you have made these foolish choices, your children, your posterity, your kingdom will suffer after you're gone. In other words, what you've done is irreversible, and the consequences of those choices will fall upon your kingdom. And Hezekiah's response to that was this: well, at least it won't happen while I'm alive. At least it won't happen during my term. And that's sad. That's sad that he took that response. In other words, I'm going to be out of here. I don't have to suffer with this. At least it won't be stuck with me. And we don't want to be that way. We want to be more like the people who plant trees whose shade we may never sit under. We plant trees whose fruit we may never partake of, because we know that in planting that tree, in years to come, generations down the road will be able to enjoy the shade or the fruit of that particular tree. And we will receive our reward in time to come. It's not about now all the time. It's not about what do I get out of it right now. It's about what do future generations look like? What does my family look like? A couple generations down the road. What will they remember about me? What will be said of their grandpa, their grandma, their aunt, their uncle? What will be said about leaders? What will be said in generations to come about me and the choices I made? Will my community benefit because of the choices I made, or will my community be struggling because of the choices I've made? These are questions we have to deal with. We have to ask ourselves, what kind of person do you want to be? That's what matters. That's what matters. What kind of person do you want to be? So, again, we can confuse cosmetic changes with critical changes. It's critical changes that make an impact and create something that lasts. It is these critical changes that will last and build a strong foundation, sturdy walls, so that things, our efforts, our accomplishments will last and they will continue, and then other generations can build upon that. So, we find ourselves, again, as you know, I'm not looking to become anything other than someone who focuses and cares about the place that I live, our community. We live in the state of Indiana. I care about Indiana. I care about how we look and the way we behave ourselves upon in the spectrum of our nation. I care about our county. We live in Henry County. And I care about our city, which I live in. And I've been a resident here, lived in the city limits for quite some time now, and we've had some great moments, and we've done some great things, and there has been some great choices. But it is clear over the past few years, as things continue to be revealed, past behaviors, past cover-ups, looking the other way, ignoring the real issues, is beginning to catch up with us in many, many ways. And what are we going to do about it? Well, continuing to try to solve the problems with the same means that caused the problems is not going to work. So it's up to individuals. Basically, you as an individual can feel like, what can I do? The problem's bigger than I am. And I get that. There's many times I've felt that I've been stuck in a position to where I see the problem, but I can't do anything about the problem because I don't have the authority to make any changes. Okay, so I recognize that. But what can I do? Well, I try to do what I can. And that's what each individual has to do is, you may see an issue, you may see a problem, and maybe it is overwhelming. Maybe you do feel like you can't do anything about it. But there are things you can do to begin to enact change that is needed on the cultural level. Can start with you. So take your, I won't give any examples because then you get into, this and that and tit for tat. And then people are like, well, what about this? Well, what about that? And yeah, I get it. Look, the bottom line is this. You can do something. The only one in control of your attitude is you. So first, let's start there. Let's start with our attitude. Something I've been saying a lot recently is this, and I believe this is I believe for right now, this is a formula for achieving the revival that we need in our community, the regeneration in our community, and what will bring about the changes that are needed to construct a future that is stable and that we're proud of, that we're truly proud of, and start being recognized in the state of Indiana as a community that has its act together, that we can be a beacon of light to those who are looking for a place that does things well. And here's the formula. We acknowledge what was, we recognize what is, but then we embrace what could be.